you were here for Ash Wednesday, you heard me talk about the book Discipleship by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, where he says that only believers obey and only the obedient believe. And he says that both of those things must go together. Belief without obedience, he says, is cheap grace, presupposed grace that allows you to live any way you want without any concern for the fruits of righteousness coming forth from your life. And then if you have obedience without belief, well, that's just works righteousness, which a person believes that he earns God's favor by doing works. He speaks that way to his modern church in the 1930s, and he concludes that because of this problem, the cathedrals of Germany are beginning to empty. And of course, you and I know have since finished emptying. He thinks it was because of cheap grace that the reformers attacked works so fiercely that they undercut the very work of hanging on to faith. His point was, if grace is presupposed and I can just do whatever I want, then what on earth is the purpose of going to church? I would imagine that all of you have better things that you could be doing this evening if all of this is just sort of superfluous. Well, our text from Deuteronomy tonight highlights God's demand for works. That is obedience. He's brought his people out of Egypt, our ancestors, and placed them in the promised land. And now he clearly demands obedient actions. In our text, God demands works. That is discipleship. And that's what discipleship is. It's just growing into who God has made you through his grace, thereby using the gifts that he has given you, and by using those gifts, thanking and praising the giver of those gifts. You know, stewardship is a dirty word in a lot of congregations. Not this one. We don't save stewardship sermons for once a year and then flog ourselves for 3 weeks right before the spinning guide comes up. We know why that's done. It's done to beat people into submission so that they'll financially support the ministry planned for the coming year. But that's a misuse of stewardship, in my opinion. Stewardship, you see, is nothing other than discipleship. It's just following God's command to faithfully give back to him some portion of what he's given to you, and in so doing, remembering that nothing is really ours. We would have nothing without him. And we never want to become attached to the things of this world so that they become an interference in our relationship with God. So note first in this text that we have in front of us from Deuteronomy that everything we have is our inheritance. That is to say, whatever you have, God's given you. From your new car to your new video game, it all came from God. Now, you have had the opportunity to work given from God. You've had the benefit of pensions and investments given from God. You've gotten the occasional check from Grandma at Christmas over the years. But regardless of the route that money took, it always goes back ultimately to God. And God calls it in our text, the land that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance. Thus really not any idea that you did it on your own. Second, he expects you to take the first fruits of that inheritance and give it back to him. He says, you shall take some of the first of all the fruit of the ground, which you harvest from the land that the Lord your God has given you. And you shall go to the priest who is in office at that time and say to him, I declare today to the Lord your God that I have come into the land that the Lord swore to our fathers to give us. Then the priest shall take the basket from your hand and set it down before the altar of the Lord your God. remember that first fruits are not leftovers. They're off the top. Before you pay the bills, before you buy the groceries, you give to God first. You take those first fruits to the priest, or in our case, to the church. And by the way, you'll notice that there was no direction of those fruits. You couldn't tell the priest Aaron that you wanted your fruits to go to this need and not that need. There were no strings on this fruit. You didn't tell Aaron, well, I'll give you my first fruits, but I don't want any of it going to Eleazar's family, because I don't like them. And you didn't get recognition for this first fruit. There was no gold plaque on the new incense altar. You gave simply because that's what God said to do. And the priests took whatever you gave and they distributed it as those had needs among the priests and their families, the poor, the widows, the orphans, and the sojourners. That's the foreigners who were with the people of Israel who didn't have any family to take care of them. Now, of course, I've heard some people say to me over this text, well, Pastor, that's Old Testament. We're not bound by the Old Testament. Well, it's true. There are some things in the Old Testament that were clearly given for a particular time. Others are not. But the rich young ruler, remember, comes up to Jesus and asks what he has to do to get saved. And Jesus tells him to take all of his possessions and sell them and give the money away. So it sounds to me like this first fruits business was sort of an overflow into the New Testament too. Look at our gospel, where the devil's trying to tempt Jesus to sin tonight. And the devil took him up and showed him what? All the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time, and said to him, to you I will give all this authority and their glory, for it's been delivered to me, and I can give to whom I will. If you then will worship me, it'll all be yours. Jesus looked at him and said, it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. Satan is going after the very Son of God here, and because Jesus is fully human, Satan hits him where it hurts. Money and power. But we see Jesus will not separate faith from obedience. The obedient believe, and believers obey. God said to worship him and him alone, and Jesus will do no other. We don't do no different when we bring our first fruits. The devil tries to tempt us too. He tries to tempt us to keep our first fruits for ourselves. He tells us lies like we can't afford to give away anything. He gets in our heads and asks us why we should give away the things that we worked so hard for, as though they were ours. He tempts us, coming in the back door with ideas like, well, we'll just keep that money separate and we'll give it later if we have any left over. But like Jesus, our faith grasps us and we obey. We give. That's discipleship. We give to satisfy God's command. We give to glorify God with our faithful obedience, and we remind ourselves in so doing that we do not need anything that God has not provided. And finally, and most importantly, we remember that he has already provided. He has provided everything that we need in this life, and he's provided life eternal as well.